I'm Evie Talbot, and my video is going to be on respiratory gas homeostasis in the house mouse. The house mouse is a rodent commonly found around humans. It has been domesticated and is often used in labs for medical research. Like any animal, it has many homeostatic systems, that is, systems for maintaining a stable internal environment despite fluctuating environmental conditions. One example is the regulation of respiratory gas levels. Oxygen, O2, and carbon dioxide, CO2, are respiratory gases. Oxygen must be inhaled and supplied to tissues for cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of this process and must be carried away and exhaled. If not enough oxygen is available for respiration, hypoxia, the mouse cannot gain enough energy for essential bodily functions and will produce lactic acid by anaerobic metabolism, which can be toxic. If too much carbon dioxide builds up, acidosis, it can reduce oxygen supply and quickly become toxic as well. This system is important to ensure normal levels of each gas. When air is inhaled, oxygen diffuses from tiny sacs in the lungs called alveoli to the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. In the blood, the protein hemoglobin binds with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin and carries it around the body to cells that need it. In the more acidic conditions around these cells, hemoglobin releases oxygen, which is then free to diffuse from the capillaries through the plasma membrane into the cell and to the mitochondria for respiration. Because they are so small, mice burn energy quickly and so have a very high respiratory rate, over 250 breaths per minute compared to just 12 to 15 in humans. However, oxygen levels tend to change quite slowly. Carbon dioxide levels are more easily detected and responded to by way of blood pH. Carbon dioxide produced in cellular respiration diffuses into the blood and nearby capillaries. Most of this combines with water in the red blood cells, forming carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is a weak diprotic acid. In the slightly basic conditions found in mouse blood, some molecules release one proton to give bicarbonate ions. Most carbon dioxide is present in blood as these ions. pH represents the concentration of hydrogen ions in solution, so this reaction causes pH to decrease by increasing acidity of the blood. A change in pH too far from the optimum of 7.3 to 7.4, about the same as for humans, will quickly lead to a decline in brain function and could be fatal. Also, in low pH conditions, hemoglobin retains less oxygen, so an excess of CO2 will also lead to a lack of oxygen supply to tissues. This phenomenon is called the Bohr shift. CO2 levels must be carefully regulated using the following negative feedback loop. If levels of CO2 are too high, the production and subsequent reaction of carbonic acid will lead to a pH that is too low. Chemoreceptors in the aorta, carotid bodies, and the medulla oblongata, the lowermost part of the brainstem, detect the change. Information is transferred from the peripheral detectors to the medulla oblongata by nerve impulses. It then sends more nerve impulses to stimulate the diaphragm and intercostal muscles to increase the respiratory rate. The excess CO2 is exhaled and the pH should return to normal. At the alveoli, carbonic acid, bicarbonate ions with hydrogen ions, and CO2 attached to hemoglobin can all be converted to CO2 and diffuse out of the blood to be exhaled, so an increase of respiratory rate will decrease blood carbon dioxide levels more quickly. Hemoglobin can also bind to CO2 to reduce the change in pH. An increased respiratory rate can alternatively be stimulated by hormones. An example is adrenaline, which is released as part of the fight or flight response. It allows the animal to increase its metabolic rate so as to have more available energy, either to defend itself or to flee. The increased respiratory rate allows the excess CO2 produced by this process to be exhaled and supplies extra oxygen for respiration. An example of a disruption to this control system is when a mouse has a disease such as pneumonia, which causes bradypnea leading to acidosis. This infection of the lungs makes it painful to breathe, so when blood pH is too low and increased respiratory rate should be stimulated, it cannot be. Carbon dioxide builds up, blood pH decreases, and oxygen being carried to cells for respiration is also decreased, leading to hypoxia. This leads to a loss of energy and reduced brain function. If the infection does not improve, it can be fatal. If a house mouse could not alter its breathing rate and control respiratory gas levels, it would not be able to escape from predators. The increased metabolic rate needed to run away would produce excess carbon dioxide and require extra oxygen. Soon the pH of the blood would drop to dangerous levels and the mouse would lose consciousness, so this homeostatic mechanism is extremely important, especially for such a small animal that is prey to many. It helps the mouse to survive long enough to reproduce and pass on its genes. This is an adaptive advantage.
Llamas. The llama is a domesticated pack animal found at high altitudes, for example, South America's Andes Mountains. Like all animals, llamas have many homeostatic regulation functions. Homeostasis is the ability for the body to maintain a constant internal environment in response to environmental changes. Specifically, the regulation of blood pressure is an example of homeostasis. Temperature and altitude are examples of external factors that can alter blood pressure. Blood pressure, which can be referred to as arterial blood pressure, is a measure of pressure being exerted by the blood upon the walls of the blood vessels. The blood carries oxygen and nutrients to specific parts of the body, so it is necessary to be able to regulate blood pressure. A higher blood pressure means there is a higher blood volume and blood is circulating around the body quicker. However, the heart has to work harder. A lower blood pressure means the arteries and vessels are relaxed and have a lower volume of blood in them, and this allows the heart to work less. The llamas native to high altitudes and at that altitude will only have a very slightly higher mean pulmonary blood pressure than do llamas born and at sea level. Llamas born at sea level, brought to high altitudes, will have their mean arterial pressure increase. Llamas born at high altitudes brought to low altitudes will experience a decrease in blood pressure. This process is similar across all mammals. The stimulus for this negative feedback loop is changes in arterial pressure. Changes in arterial pressure are detected by sensitive clusters of neurons called baroreceptors. The two most important baroreceptors are found in the common carotid and the aortic arch. They can detect changes in blood pressure as they are sensitive to stretching or reduction of stretching of the wall they are in due to increased pressure or decreased pressure. Signals are then sent to a part of the brain, the cardiovascular center in the medulla oblongata of the brain. Common carotid baroreceptors and the aortic arch baroreceptors send signals to the brain through different nerves. The results are processed by the brain. Blood pressure is indicated in the medulla oblongata by the rate of nerve impulses. A faster rate indicates a higher blood pressure. In response, the brain causes hormones to be released. For example, adrenaline is one of the hormones that contributes to raising blood pressure. Also, instead, signals can be sent back through the nerves to the blood vessels to contract or expand, which changes blood pressure. These responses will either cause blood vessels to constrict or dilate depending on what the initial change was. If blood pressure had been initially too low, vasoconstriction occurs, which raises the blood pressure. If blood pressure had been initially too high, vasodilation occurs, which lowers the blood pressure. The baroreceptors detect the restoration of blood pressure, and the cardiovascular system gets a message to stop causing the rise or lowering of the blood pressure, as it is now normal again. Homeostasis has now been achieved. Hypertension and hypotension can be caused by factors such as temperature and altitude. An altitude higher than normal or a temperature lower than the normal can cause hypotension. Hypertension is when blood pressure is unnaturally elevated by an environmental condition and extreme vasoconstriction occurs. An altitude lower than normal or a body temperature higher than normal can cause hypotension. Hypotension is when blood pressure is unusually lowered by an environmental condition causing extreme vasodilation to occur. Possibly fatal hypotension can occur in a situation such as where shock has occurred. The mammal is presumably suffering from a large wound, and vasodilation occurs in an attempt to get blood to the area of damage, which usually helps in the case of smaller wounds. Vasodilation intensifies as more blood is lost, causing there to be a lack of blood in organs, usually causing death. The adaptive significance of the homeostasis of blood pressure is to optimize the flow of blood around the body compared to how hard the heart has to work. If the llama can successfully regulate its blood pressure, it can survive and reproduce. If the llama cannot regulate its blood pressure, this will lead to problems such as, if high blood pressure, the heart will work too hard, causing a promoted earlier death. The constriction of the blood vessels also means that clots in the blood have higher rate of occurring, which can lead to death. If low blood pressure, blood cannot be sufficiently delivered to the extremities of the body, as the heart cannot pump hard enough. This lack of blood, which contains oxygen and nutrients in extremities, means that the cells there cannot undergo respiration. If this can be done more efficiently by getting an optimal amount of oxygen and nutrients around the body to each cell without the heart having to work too hard or vessels clotting, there will be a higher chance the llama will be able to survive and pass on its genes through reproduction.
And I'm begging you,